Congratulations to all of you for being healthy. The earlier class, I have 11 students in the class and 5 of them showed up. So.
Hey, this is more than average today.
There's no stitches in there.
Oh, good job. Yeah, you're actually healthy. Like you had a giant hole in your finger last week and now you don't. All right.
Wait, I can't a giant hole in it.
We are on lesson 8, page 33 today. We've been dealing with the extra-biblical evidence of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. Well, really, we've just been dealing with Jesus as a whole. So first, we talked about his existence. Does Jesus really exist? And it's kind of hard to deny that Jesus really existed. So that was, but it's important. There are people who do it, and we certainly don't want to allow them to make us stumble. So it's good to note how much evidence there is, even outside the Bible, that Jesus actually existed. Now, last week we kind of tackled the philosophical issue of who Jesus is, because a lot of the people who agree that Jesus existed but don't believe that Jesus is Lord, and there are a lot of them, they believe that Jesus was just a good moral teacher. And so last week we kind of tackled that false understanding of Jesus. Jesus does not want to be thought of as just a good moral teacher. And the things that he is recorded to have said, which is the only record we have of what he said, so if you want to have an opinion about Jesus, it has to be based on the gospel accounts. The things that Jesus is recorded to have said are not the things that a good moral teacher would say. He was he claimed to be God. He claimed to be one with the Father. He claimed to be the only way to the Father. He made so many incredible claims about himself that if you choose not to believe those claims, then you must either say that Jesus was a liar, that is, he was lying about himself and thus not a good moral teacher, or that he was a lunatic, that he actually believed what he said, but since you don't believe what he said, then you must think that he thought something about himself that was crazy. And if you are not prepared to admit that Jesus was a liar or a lunatic, the only other option you have is to say that he is in fact the Lord. And so that little exercise is kind of meant to force people to have an opinion about Jesus. Because here's the thing, people outside of the church, they kind of think that Jesus is just another holy man. They throw him in the pile with the Buddha and the Prophet Muhammad and, whatever other, holy mumbo-jumbo prophet type they've got. And they just figure, no big deal. But Jesus is a big deal. And so when dealing with people like that, a lot of times the biggest task you're going to have before you is simply getting them to think about Jesus, to think of him as more than just another holy guy, but to think of him as somebody who actually is, worth thinking about and important to understand. Let me get some of my junk out of your way. Welcome, Caleb. And so the liar, lunatic, Lord discussion that we had last week was mostly intended to get people thinking about Jesus. You cannot just have a ho-hum opinion on Jesus. Either he was a liar and a dirty, rotten one at that, he was a lunatic who thought he was equivalent to God himself, or he was actually right. And so that's one angle. Of course, there are multiple angles that we need to take about Jesus, because there are many who would then say, well, I just don't believe what Jesus' followers wrote about him. They were under this belief that Jesus was risen from the dead, and that's ridiculous. People don't rise from the dead, obviously, so in trying to make their man sound more like a god, they must have added in these other little sayings of Jesus. And there's actually very, very, very little evidence in the text that, I shouldn't put it that way. There's very, very, very much evidence in the text that did not happen. But we're going to be spending a whole unit studying the actual text of the Bible after the Jesus unit. So I'm going to kind of push off that discussion until then. So we're kind of, we're assuming that the people who wrote about Jesus, that their writings are authentic. The gospel writer Matthew was a disciple of Jesus who lived with him and walked with him and learned from him and all that stuff. And so we're looking at the account of Jesus' death and resurrection, and we're asking the question, did Jesus really die and rise again? So let's skim or summarize the account of Jesus' death and resurrection from Mark chapters 15 and 16 and or John 18 through 20. Anybody? So we're not going to read that outright, but does anyone feel confident in their skimming? How about this? I'm not going to ask anyone to skim. Take a moment, open your Bible to Mark 15 to 16. We're going to focus on that one because I have to pick one, and that one's a shorter one. Mark 15 to 16. Mark is the shortest book of the Bible. In the children's message last Sunday, I quoted Mark chapter 17, and that was intentional, although I don't know if anybody got it, because there is no Mark chapter 17. Yeah. If I ever want to make up something and make it sound like it came from the Bible, which sounds exactly like what a heretic would do, but I promise it's all in good fun. If I want to make up something from the Bible, a good New Testament source is Mark 17, and a good Old Testament source is the book of Hezekiah. But there is no book of Hezekiah, but it sure sounds like it, doesn't it? He was a king of Israel, did a lot of important stuff, but never wrote a book, or at least got one named after him. We're in the Gospel according to Mark, beginning at chapter 15. So, just skimming the headings there. This is on page 1176 in your Faith Alive Bible. If you're not there already, you should be, but just looking at the headings. We're not starting that. Just looking at the headings, what are some things that we see about Jesus?
He was mocked.
Okay.
His crucifixion.
Who mocked him, by the way?
Pilate.
It actually wasn't Pilate who mocked him. Soldiers, right. Roman soldiers in particular. So we do want to keep a distinction in mind between the Jews and the Romans, because they were both involved in the crucifixion of Christ. Pontius Pilate was important, though. I'm going to go ahead and just quote the creed here, because Pilate appears multiple times in this. But at the end of the day, Pontius Pilate is the governor who oversees the trial of Jesus. Now, he tries to be a wimp and be like, I wash my hands of this man's blood, and you do with him what you want. But he was the only one with the power to stop Jesus' crucifixion, and he didn't. So he gets the blame, even though he really, really doesn't want it. Just because he lacks a spine doesn't mean he doesn't get blamed. So yeah, he could have stopped Jesus' crucifixion. He knew it was wrong, but he didn't. So he is forever remembered as the one under whom Jesus suffered. What else do we hear about Jesus just from the headings? And you're welcome to skim through the paragraphs if you think you can glean more information as well. Or from your memory, if you remember something about Jesus, I'd be happy to verify it for you.
He was getting crucified, and then on his cross, they mocked him by putting a sign or whatever on it being "This is the King of the Jews."
Okay. Crucified. I'm going to make that its own line, and I'm going to change the blue because my black just died. And it left the mark on the wall. I guess it wasn't completely dead. I have to clean that up. Crucified, charged. So yeah, what Elliot's referring to is the sign that read, "This is the King of the Jews." And typically when people were crucified, the Romans would write why they were being crucified on a sign over their head so that people passing by would know, hey, if you do this thing, you become this thing. This other thing being the guy on the cross. And the Pharisees got mad and said that the sign should say, this man said, I am the King of the Jews. But that's not what Pontius Pilate wrote, and he stood beside it. He said, what I've written, I've written. And what he written was simply Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. Jesus Nazarenus Rex Judaion, INRI. you're ever wondering why sometimes Jesus is depicted with the letters I-N-R-I above his head, that's the Latin for Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. What else?
Wait, is this out of 15 and 16?
Yes, it is.
Jesus appeared to two of his disciples.
Okay, that's pretty important, isn't it? Appeared risen to two disciples. Yeah, I got risen there. Yeah, I put risen there because he appeared to lots of people when he was dying on the cross. It was a very public spectacle. But in his resurrection, he appeared to two disciples there. Who else did he appear to?
Mary.
Mary Magdalene, yep. Oh, I should keep that risen up there too. To Mary Magdalene, yep. How about before the Jesus appears headings in Mark 16?
Jesus died. And then he rose again.
Died. Okay. He died. I'll throw that up here. I guess this will be the death side. The death, yeah. The top of the board is death, bottom of the board is resurrection.
His resurrection.
What about it?
Well, it wasn't on the Sabbath. It was on the first day of the week after the Sabbath.
Okay. So rose on Sunday. Yeah, we worship on Sundays, not because it's the Sabbath, but because it's the day that Jesus rose from the dead. And since we are set free from days and seasons and what have you, as far as what we have to observe, we choose to worship on Sundays because that is like the most significant thing that ever happened on a Sunday. I'll help you out here. Women found empty tomb. Empty tomb.
Yeah, there were angels inside his grave, wasn't there?
There was what?
Angels inside his tomb.
There were, yes. Entering the tomb, they saw a young man sitting on the right side dressed in a white robe, and they were alarmed. And he said to them, "Do not be alarmed. You seek Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He is risen. He's not here. See the place where they laid him." Well,
What two disciples did Jesus appear to?
These two, let me see this one. We don't usually read Mark 16 past verse 9 because not all manuscripts of Mark have this. Okay, this is probably the two disciples on the road to Emmaus, which, is that in, I don't think it's in John, but in Luke? No. If you look at John's gospel, if you're familiar with the episode of Doubting Thomas, that's in John. That's John 20 verse 24. Maybe we do have the road to Emmaus. Nope. It must be in Matthew then, because I've checked the other three. Yeah, so Matthew's gospel, Jesus dies and rises in all three of the gospels, but they say different things. Where's the road to Emmaus? I must have overlooked it. Well, anyway, there's an account of one of Jesus' post-resurrection appearances where he appears. There's two disciples who are walking to a town called Emmaus, and they're talking about all the stuff that's happened, and they're all very sad, or all two of them are very sad. And then Jesus joins them, but they don't recognize him. They think he's just a traveler. And he's like, "What are you guys talking about?" And they're like, "Have you been living under a rock? You know, we're talking about Jesus who died." And they tell him the story of his own death. And then Jesus tells them how the Old Testament says that the Messiah would die and then after 3 days rise again. And it's very encouraging for them. And so they invite him over for supper after they reach their destination. And Jesus breaks bread and says a prayer of thanksgiving to God. And then in that moment, they realize, oh my gosh, this is Jesus. And then in that moment, Jesus is gone. He disappears. So, and then they run back and tell the other disciples, but Jesus had appeared to them as well. Now I'm thinking it is John. I don't know. Anyway, the point is that if you look at the last couple chapters of each of the Gospels, you will see a number of post-resurrection appearances from Jesus. We've got some details here to work with, so we'll keep that in mind there. So we're going to turn the page in your workbook to page 38, and I'll read to you the crucifixion clues. In lesson 6, now we're on page 34. Did I say 38?
Yes, you did.
Yeah, it's 38 in the teacher book. That's just confusing, isn't it? They really should switch to, I don't know what they should do in the teacher book, but it sure makes me say the wrong thing a lot. All right, crucifixion clues. In lesson 6, this was 2 weeks ago, you learned the importance of non-Christian witnesses to the facts of Christ's life. The Greek historian Tacitus reported the execution of Jesus by orders from the governor Pontius Pilate during the reign of Emperor Tiberius. That is a different thing than we looked at last week. Oh, no, it wasn't. Tacitus was there. Page 26, if you care to review what we looked at before. We read a little bit from Tacitus and a little bit from Josephus. And I think didn't I give you Josephus to read at home? Yeah, so look at that. You got to read a legit primary source, classical document about the death of Christ. Or at least an excerpt. And then we've got Thallus, another classical historian, writes about a lengthy darkness during the time of Jesus' crucifixion. Luke also mentions this 3-hour darkness. What, are you showing me something? No. Okay. Luke also mentions this 3-hour darkness in his gospel, chapter 23, verses 44 to 45. Yeah, so I don't know if you guys know this, but for 3 hours during Jesus' crucifixion, in the middle of the day, it was dark. From the 6th hour, which would have been noon, to the 9th hour, which would have been about 3 p.m. So for 3 hours, middle of the day, it was just dark. And not like cloudy, it was dark. Some people think it might have been an eclipse, but eclipses don't last that long. So we're really left to wonder what on earth, because he specifically says from the 6th hour to the 9th hour, there was darkness over the land. And Luke, of course Luke would record such a supernatural event because he's biased, right? He's a believer. But Thallus is not a believer, and yet he reports a lengthy darkness during the time of Jesus' crucifixion. So we have somebody who is not a Christian, not a believer, recognizing that there was definitely an unusual darkness, a lengthy darkness during that time. Phlegon, a secular authority, secular again means non-religious. Secular authority attempts to explain the darkness during the crucifixion as a total eclipse that occurred during full moon at the time of Tiberius Caesar. So he tries to explain it as an eclipse, but again, we know from, we just know. Eclipses only last for minutes. They do not last for hours. Solar eclipses, at least I think. Pretty sure that's right. I guess I didn't verify that for this lesson, but I was taught that solar eclipses only last for a few minutes in any one location. Obviously, they will tear across a whole continent, but
most
essentially
eclipses happen very shortly, but some can get a little bit lengthy. It's very rare. Very. And it's not super lengthy.
You'd have to be directly in the shadow, directly in the center of the moon's shadow as it moves across the surface of the earth. But even then, I don't think it could possibly last more than a few minutes.
10 minutes.
Yeah, a lunar eclipse lasts a long time because the earth makes a gigantic shadow, but the moon makes a very tiny shadow. And you have to be in the exact right part of it just to see the whole sun get covered. So yeah, and even then it's only a few minutes. Lucian, a Greek satirist, labeled Christians misguided creatures who worshipped a crucified sage. So all four of these extra biblical quotes are noting that Jesus was crucified, and 2 of them are noting the darkness that fell over the land during Jesus' crucifixion. So one of them tries to explain it away, the other one just mentions that it happened. So, very strong evidence that Jesus was crucified. But I'll be honest with you, anybody who believes that Jesus existed probably also believed that Jesus was crucified. There was a time when skeptics didn't believe that crucifixion was real. They thought that Christians had invented it as a way to make their Lord sound like he had suffered more than anyone has ever suffered before. But we now know, thanks to archaeology, that crucifixion was a regular form of the death penalty under the Roman government. They invented it, it was horrifying, but they did it with sad regularity. So, yeah, no, not too many critics these days believe that Jesus wasn't crucified. You never hear about the criticisms of the Bible that ended up being false. The critics just stop using them and come up with new ones. But there are a lot of them, and if you live through enough of them being disproven, it will help your faith quite a bit. And you'll hear some other criticism of the Bible that you don't have an answer to, and you'll be like, well, this sounds just like the other dozen criticisms that people used to believe, and now it's been proven wrong. So I'm thinking the Bible will probably survive this one too. And honestly, the Bible has had critics for 2,000 years, and yet none of their criticisms have ever been able to stick. So that alone should tell you something. But if a critic is going to focus anywhere on the story of Jesus, it's going to be not on his death, because everybody dies, but on his resurrection. And so we come to the red box on page 34, the anti-resurrection theories. So it is a recognized fact, by most anyway, that the tomb in which Jesus was buried was in fact empty on Easter morning. The non-believers will have a hard time proving that it wasn't empty. But why was it empty? Certainly not because a man rose from the dead. Instead, we have the swoon theory. This theory claims that Jesus simply fainted, revived in the tomb, and escaped, giving the appearance of being resurrected. So let's quick review what this tomb situation was like. So Jesus, Jesus died on probably like a cliff overlooking a town, or maybe there was maybe there was a road going up nearby, something like that. People could see him as they walked by. It was a whole public thing. And then he was brought to a nearby tomb. We don't know where the tomb was, although there's somebody in Jerusalem who thinks they know where it was, and they make a lot of money probably selling tickets to go check it out. But we don't honestly know where the tomb was, but we do know it was a cave. So it's typically drawn as like a hole in a hill like that, but we have no idea. It might have been a hole in the side of a cliff or something. I've never even been to Jerusalem, so I couldn't tell you what the topography is like. But let's imagine that it was a hole in a hill like this. The guy who owned it, I think, have I told you guys in this group about how they put bodies on shelves in crypts? Okay, so this is a common way that they would keep bodies. We're going to zoom in inside the cave here. So the way a tomb typically was laid out was in the middle there was a long table, something like this, but this is like a big block. It doesn't have pretty legs or whatever. It's a big old block of stone in the middle of the tomb. Probably, the guys carving out the tomb just left a chunk in the middle. And all around the walls of the tomb, they weren't all square shaped, but I'm going to draw this one square shaped for the sake of convenience. All around the walls of the tomb, there would have been shelves. So here, I'll give it a squiggly ceiling. And in each of these shelves, there would be a body. So can I draw a body? There we go. Body going on back there. Yep. And yes, some of the shelves were empty because there was no body in them yet, but some of them had bodies. And so that's kind of how it was. The dead body would be brought into the tomb. We'll put the door over here, I guess. But it was a round door. Anyway, body would be brought into the tomb, laid on the table. They would prepare the body for burial on the table. This typically involved putting spices on it. That's what the women who were visiting the tomb on Sunday morning were going to do. They were going to cover the body with spices that would kind of act as a preservative, like an embalming agent. They were going to wrap it. They left him wrapped in cloths, burial cloths. But the women were going to unwrap him, prepare his body properly with all the spices, because they kind of had to rush to get him in the tomb, because nobody wanted to touch a dead body on the Sabbath because of tradition. So they quick rushed him into the tomb, just kind of wrapped him up, laid him on the thing, said, we'll be back on Sunday, and rolled a stone in front of the door. And normally you would prepare the body on the table, and then you would hoist it up and just slide it into one of the shelves there. I believe they go back. Now that I'm thinking about it, it might actually be, well, whatever. It could be both. So I'm going to do the other one here. The other one, it might be a shallow shelf like this, where the body is laid, lengthwise on the shelf there. Yeah, that's about right. This is supposed to be like in darkness. I don't know. The whole thing is dark. It's a cave. Not many people hang out there, because they're dead bodies and all. But however they were laid in there, they were placed in the shelf on the tomb. Now, Jesus was in a unique situation. The man who offered up his family tomb for Jesus said that it had been freshly carved and nobody else was in there. So Jesus was by himself in this tomb. There would have been places for more bodies, but there were no other bodies. It was just Jesus in this tomb. And yeah, as I mentioned, they rolled a big stone in front of the door. So now we're looking at the external view again. And I don't know, here's the door. Sure, why not? Now here's the door. Haha, because it's doing a rectangle door. And here's a great big stone. It would have been much larger than the door itself. Great big stone. Probably flat, so like a disc. And there would have even been kind of a track that the stone could be rolled in. And so when they buried Jesus in the tomb, they placed him in there. There's the thing, and there's his body going on back there. They placed him in the tomb, and they rolled the stone in front of the door. Oops, sorry. You know what it looks like. And then, because the Pharisees who crucified Jesus, they knew that Jesus had said, after 3 days I will rise again. And so they petitioned Pontius Pilate and got a guard from him. And a guard is not a single person, it's actually an entire unit. I believe it was 15 men, but they got an entire military unit to stand guard outside of the tomb to keep people from coming in and stealing the body. And they would have stood during the day, they would have slept. I read there's a whole formation that they slept in at night. If they were guarding a single point of entry, they would actually sleep with their heads toward the door and their bodies kind of out away from the door, like this, so that if somebody came, they would have to get through 3 rows or more of guards sleeping like this, so that even if they just opened their eyes a little bit, they could look down at their feet and make sure there was nobody coming. And you'd have to step right next to their heads and all of that. So they were prepared for an escape attempt or a theft attempt, as we'll get to in a moment. So, having given you all that background on ancient Near Eastern tombs and Roman guards and things like this, and these are from secular sources. The Bible doesn't say any of this. It just assumes that you know this. We had to have archaeologists and historians tell us about this stuff. But they have, and we have no reason to doubt them. So yeah, the swoon theory says that Jesus simply fainted, revived in the tomb, and escaped, giving the appearance of being resurrected. So, can anyone think of any problems with that? That Jesus just, yeah? I'm sorry, that was Addison.
Like when he kind of just left the tomb afterward. First, how would he just leave the tomb if there was a big stone that's much bigger than the door?
Mm-hmm.
I think. And then I feel like because Jesus was bleeding so much on the cross that there's no way he could be fine.
Yeah, no way he could be fine. So since the men on the cross died on the Sabbath, you recall that Jesus actually had some neighbors in his crucifixion, one on his right and one on his left. They were dying on a Friday, and it was a very special Friday. The Jews in their holy city of Jerusalem did not want dead bodies hanging around outside on the Sabbath, especially the Sabbath of the Passover. And so what the Romans did was, when sundown was approaching, they went up and they broke the legs of the 2 guys on either side of Jesus. Because crucifixion, when you are crucified, you don't die by bleeding out. You die because you suffocate. as you hang there, you need to be using your feet to kind of hold yourself up so you can breathe. And the longer you hang there, the more tired you get. Eventually, you can't lift yourself up anymore. And that's why crucifixion is such a horrible way to die. Not only is it humiliating, but you slowly suffocate as you fail to breathe. But when they got to Jesus, they found he'd already died because he had been beaten half to death the night before. And the cross just kind of finished the job. That and, the whole wrath of God thing kind of brings him into death. But instead of breaking his legs, they did stick a spear in his side to see if he was dead. When they pulled the spear out, a mixture of blood and water flowed out. I think that's in Luke's gospel. And Luke even says, we know the guard who did the poking, and he verifies this is true. And so his when a person dies and their blood stops flowing, it begins to separate, as a suspension would do if it were left to its own devices. And so you get kind of the blood platelets and cells and things like that separate from the plasma, which is basically just water. And so if you stick a hole in a dead guy and let the fluid come out, it's going to be a mix of blood and water that have been separated. Also some cool sacramental things in there with baptism and Holy Communion, but that's just beside the point. If that's all true, and again, you could say it was made up, but at that point you can just say the whole thing is made up, and it gets kind of circular when you want to pick and choose which details are made up. So if Jesus was really dead, and there's a Roman soldier to verify it, then he certainly didn't come back to life. And if he did just swoon, then we would have to kind of deal with a situation like this. He'd have to get the rock out of the way, and then he would have to kind of sneak around the guards like that, trying to escape. This is what I'm trying to do here. Just a sneaky little Jesus there, trying to get past the bajillion Roman guards posted in front of the tomb. What else there? Jesus is also in total darkness, by the way, in this tomb, and he was wrapped up like a mummy in tightly wound grave clothes. So he would have had to escape the grave clothes, find the door, and then also just survive. Very unlikely. Next, we have the theft theory. This theory claims that the disciples came and stole Jesus' body from the tomb. This theory is based in part on the claims of the tomb guards in Matthew 28:13. So I'll go ahead and read that for you real quick. Matthew 28:13. I'm going to start at verse 11. While they were going, behold, some of the guard went into the city and told the chief priests all that had taken place, which is to say there was an earthquake, and they all fell to the ground like dead men, and when they woke up, the tomb was empty. And this is verse 12, and when they had assembled with the elders and taken counsel, they gave a sufficient sum of money to the soldiers, read a bribe, and they said, tell the people his disciples came by night and stole him away while we were asleep. And if it comes to the governor's ears, we will satisfy him and keep you out of trouble. Because the punishment for Roman guards who fail at their job was death. If somebody were to sneak past them and steal the thing that they were supposed to be guarding, then they would be punished by execution. And they didn't want that to happen. So the Pharisees told him, or the chief priest, whoever told him, just give this story to the people, and if the governor finds out, starts to believe this lie, we'll take care of him, probably with another bribe and maybe a better explanation. So what are some problems with the theft theory? Yeah?
Middle of the night, and how many people does it take to move a rock? Like a big...
So the rock is still a problem, right? It's I'm glad I drew it for you so you get an idea. The women, there was a group of them, of at least 3 of them. They did not think that they themselves could move it away. So I know women are not exactly the powerhouses of Bible times, but there's 3 of them, and they're like, we're not going to be able to move that rock. We're going to need some help. I wonder who we're going to get to help us. And then they saw it was already gone, so they didn't. It was a moot point at that point, but the rock being moved is a big deal. Certainly too big for one.
I don't know if you could move it without making any noise to wake anyone up.
Rocks are noisy, And then you still have the issue, now there's 3 or more of them, but you still have the issue of guys having to be sneaky past all those Roman guards, and that's just not going to happen. And then here's a good one though. I never even thought of this, but the teacher's guide mentions it. If the soldiers were sleeping when the theft occurred, then how would they know that it was Jesus' followers who stole the body?
Boom.
It's even within the text, the story doesn't make much sense. But then, okay, so in addition to the accounts of Jesus' tomb being empty, there are also many different accounts. That clock isn't right. We have about 19 minutes. There are also many different accounts of Jesus' followers seeing him risen from the dead after his resurrection. And there are a lot of different accounts. The Bible even tells its readers to go and find people. I forget where it is now, but it's one of Paul's epistles where he says that Jesus appeared to over 400 people after his resurrection, and he said most of them are still alive, although some of them have fallen asleep. And the reason he says that, fallen asleep, means they died. That's when the Apostle Paul speaks of Christians dying, he says that they fell asleep, because the thinking is that they will wake up again at the resurrection of the dead. But those who die outside of Christ, they actually die, because that's the end for them. They're going to wake up again, but it's only to more death. So that's a shame. But anyway, Paul says that Jesus appeared to over 400 people, most of whom are still alive. He says that because he wants his readers he's challenging them. Go find somebody else who saw Jesus. There's hundreds of them. And go ask them. Addison?
I kind of have an off-topic question, but
okay.
So in Mrs. West, or our geography class, we're kind of learning about different religions.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering, do you have to believe, do you have to believe everything that we believe to, get into heaven, exactly everything?
Not exactly everything.
Or is it kind of a bit of I don't want to say lenience, but you know what I mean?
So obviously you want to believe in things that are true, and God's word is the source of truth. So within what we call the Christian faith, there are many denominations that believe different things. The Baptists, they believe that, what's one big thing that separates us from them? Well, they believe that God's Holy Spirit doesn't work through baptism. So we think that, or rather the Bible says that baptism produces faith. Baptism saves you. That's in 1 Peter 3, and it's all over. And they believe, no, baptism doesn't save you. Baptism is something you do after you've been saved. And so a big thing then is, do you baptize babies? We say, yeah, because that's how God saves people. And they say, no, because babies can't confess any sort of rational faith. So, we're butting heads. But that's a very important detail. But if you were to ask a Lutheran or a Baptist, how are you saved? They would say, by faith in the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And that's what the Bible says too. Now, we quibble over how that faith comes, and it is an important quibble. I'm not trying to downplay it, but there are plenty of Baptists who will be in heaven because they have faith that Jesus Christ died for their sins and rose again. And that's how most churches that call themselves Christian have that belief. So even though they're wrong on lots of other stuff, and certainly we could be wrong on some things, I don't think we are, or else I would become part of whatever church I thought was right. But certainly a lot of other people think we're wrong, and they might be right. But the essentials of the Christian faith are recognizing that you're a sinner, and that you fall short of God's perfect standard, trusting in Jesus as the only one who saves you from your sin, not in yourself, not in your works, but only in Jesus. And that's about it, really. You can elaborate a little bit on who Jesus is and what have you, and I'm sure there are plenty of heresies, but that's over and against the Muslims, who say that Jesus was just a prophet and everything we have about him is wrong anyway. And the Jews, who on a good day will say Jesus was a nice teacher, but nothing more. And then you've got the Buddhists, who have I think they have the Eightfold Path, and the Hindus, who try to work on good karma to achieve nirvana in one of their many, many lives that you'll reincarnate into. And so most of the so-called Christian churches trust in Jesus for salvation, and that's, Jesus himself says, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. So, yeah, I guess that kind of answers your question, maybe?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Good question. Anyway, so back to the hallucination theory, right? Hundreds of people claim to have seen Jesus after his resurrection. Many of them were executed for that claim. They were martyred. They had plenty of chance to recant, and there is no existing historical record that says that these Christians who saw the risen Jesus went back on that claim. There were certainly some Christians later who, believed on faith. They never met Jesus, just like you and I have never met Jesus, and they chickened out in the face of death and renounced their faith. But of the ones who actually saw Jesus, none of them is recorded to have renounced their faith. Many of them are recorded to have been executed for their faith, which they did not renounce. So we're not just dealing with an absence of evidence. We have evidence that says they did not renounce their faith, given every chance to do so. And that's why the hallucination theory is kind of bunk. The hallucination theory is all kinds of bunk. It's never been observed for an entire group, specifically dozens or hundreds of people, to hallucinate the same thing together. That is just unknown for that to happen. So, like, the hallucination theory, to give it a little more time, says that, for example, when Jesus appeared to his 11 disciples in the upper room on Easter Sunday, and then again appeared, I guess it was to 10 disciples in the upper room, and then again appeared a week later with Thomas there. It's at the end of John, the doubting Thomas story. The theory says that those guys were just hallucinating, right? They'd been through some intense trauma. They were under extreme stress. They probably hadn't slept. They weren't eating well, if at all. They were terrified out of their wits. And they all had this group hallucination that the one thing that they wanted more than anything else in the world was actually happening. And so an armchair psychologist might say that that was a hallucination. And so also were the 2 disciples on the road to Emmaus, and the hundreds who saw Jesus ascend into heaven, and this, that, and the other. Lots of people were hallucinating all over the place. The problem with that is that's never been observed. That's pure speculation. Somebody doesn't want it to be true, so they make up a reason why it couldn't be true. And even though the reason has no basis in fact or evidence or reality or science, they say that must be it, because that makes sense to me. And it doesn't make sense in the absolute sense. And let's talk a little more about those persecuted people. Is it warm in here now? Yeah, Addison, could you turn off the heater, please? Not that it'll do much good in 10 minutes, but Caleb? Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, I'm feeling a little warm too. But hey, at least it's not freezing cold, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I should have known since it's like 40 degrees outside that maybe I didn't need to preheat the room. All right, we're on page 35. Any questions on those anti-resurrection theories? Really? All right, the persecuted people. Historians Pliny the Younger and Tacitus, these are again classical historians, not Christians, they reported the persecution and execution of Christ's followers in the 1st and 2nd centuries. So being a Christian in Rome was extremely unpopular, and they were systematically hunted, persecuted, executed, denied rights, denied life. It was a very bad time for the church. Romans developed many, quote, creative and gruesome methods of execution, including covering people in animal skins and having dogs tear them apart, nailing Christians to a cross, and turning Christians into human torches to illuminate nighttime festivals. All of these are attested to by classical historians. These are not Christians trying to make their own sound like martyrs. These are classical historians just noting the things that were done. Sometimes they approved. Sometimes they were like, those stupid Christians, they get what they deserve when they were burned to light Nero's garden festivals and stuff like that. But they report it as being true. So, question, how might the willingness of believers to risk these punishments be seen as proof of Jesus' resurrection?
Well,
die for something that is not true?
Yeah. Well, that's the question you need to ask. Why would they die for something, not just that isn't true, right? I've never seen Jesus. I would hopefully die for my faith if push came to shove and I had to do it. That alone doesn't make my faith right, because my faith was always in something that I hoped for. But what these people did was they claimed to have seen Jesus. So, either they were hallucinating or they were lying. And if they were hallucinating, that goes against every known psychological reality surrounding hallucinations that exist. And if they were lying, which is very possible, if they were lying, then you would think at least one of them would have been like, ha, just kidding, we made it up, please don't set me on fire, But they didn't. Again, there is no record of any witness to Christ renouncing his faith in the face of death. But there are plenty of accounts of Christ's followers dying rather than recanting their faith. Use online resources to explore how Christians around the world are suffering persecution for their beliefs. How could we assist these fellow believers? So a great online resource, which I don't have like a projector in here or anything, so I didn't look it up, or I didn't prepare anything to show you. But a good website you might use is Voice of the Martyrs. Are you looking for something in particular?
I don't remember if I still have that handout of the map that you gave us.
Oh, yeah. I thought I remembered something like that.
You definitely gave us a handout, and I might have thrown it away.
Okay, well, yeah, I gave you a handout much earlier in the class. And if you're interested, I can print more of them because I have them in my computer file. But that handout was provided by Voice of the Martyrs. Did you get it? Wow,
I have that.
I'm impressed. 1,000 years off purgatory for Elliot.
Yes!
Woo!
Yeah!
Alright, so the map that Elliot is holding there is a handout that I provided to all of you earlier in the class that talks about where in the world Christians are being persecuted for their faith today. And not historically, not the Roman Empire, but now. Some of the persecution is that they're simply frowned upon by their culture. Other forms of persecution are, up to and including a death sentence for converting to Christianity. That's common in Muslim countries. As to how we could assist these fellow believers, we can certainly give money to organizations like the Voice of the Martyrs. I know between all of us in this room there isn't a lot of money to give, but there are a lot of prayers that can be said. So we can say prayers for these people as well, and we could perhaps organize some kind of fundraiser or something of that nature for our church to give support to them as well. I know Lutheran Bible Translators is really big on sending people into these countries where Christianity is illegal so that they can translate the Bible and the Lutheran confessions, which help people understand the Bible and disseminate them throughout the countries. I've heard of some really interesting stories. There was one missionary, I forget if it was the pastor who I grew up with, who confirmed me, was a missionary in Japan for a long time. I don't think this is his story. He might have told it. I heard an account of somebody who had a whole duffel bag filled with Bibles, and they were trying to smuggle these Bibles into China or some other country where it was illegal to import Bibles. And they got stopped by the authorities, and they were searching their bags. And the missionaries were like, well, that's it, the gig is up. We're going to lose our Bibles. We might even get thrown in prison for trying to smuggle, whatever. They get to the bag with the Bibles in it, and the authorities open them up, and they are all blank inside. There are no words. It's just empty books. They look like, journals or something that you're going to write in someday. And the guys were like, well, this is weird, but whatever. If you want to bring empty books into the country, we're not going to stop you. And but they were actually Bibles. They had perfectly visible text that the missionaries used to distribute them. So that's one modern day miracle that I was told. I know this is like friend of a friend territory at this point, so I can't expect you to take it as proof of anything, but just one of the ways that God's Holy Spirit is still at work in the world today in places where the church is under persecution.
people still like get crucified on the cross like to these days?
There's no nation that I know of that uses crucifixion as a death penalty. Usually, if there is a death penalty, it's by hanging or by firing squad, or there's always really shady stuff that happens behind closed doors or what have you. But as far as public executions, a big part of crucifixion was that it was public. And I don't believe there are any societies anymore who do public executions by crucifixion. It's usually hanging or beheading or firing squad. I don't have time to talk about firing squads. It's not related to the Bible at all, but they're kind of neat. Why is the reality of the resurrection essential to the Christian faith? See 1 Corinthians 15, 3-28. Why do we care so much about the resurrection in particular? I will tell you. 1 Corinthians 15 is it's on page 1351 in your Faith Alive Bible, and I'll read it to you. The Apostle Paul writes, "For I delivered to you as of first importance what I also received, that Christ died for our sins in accordance with the Scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day in accordance with the Scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas," that is Peter, that's Peter's Greek name, that's Peter's Hebrew name, sorry. He appeared to Cephas, never mind, it's Peter. Then to the 12, then he appeared to more than 500 brothers at one time. Oh, there it is. Then he appeared to more than 500 brothers at one time, most of whom are still alive, though some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James, then to all the apostles. Last of all, as to one untimely born, he also appeared to me. For I am the least of the apostles, unworthy to be called an apostle, because I persecuted the church of God. But by the grace of God, I am what I am, and his grace toward me was not in vain. On the contrary, I worked harder than any of them, though it was not I, but the grace of God that is with me. Whether it was I or they, so we preach, and so you believed. Now, if Christ is proclaimed as raised from the dead, how can some of you say that there is no resurrection of the dead? But if there's no resurrection of the dead, then not even Christ has been raised. And if Christ has not been raised, then our preaching is in vain, and your faith is in vain. We are even found to be misrepresenting God, because we testified about God that he raised Christ, whom he did not raise, if it's true that the dead are not raised. For if the dead are not raised, not even Christ has been raised. And if Christ has not been raised, your faith is futile, and you are still in your sins. Then also those who have fallen asleep in Christ have perished. If in Christ we have hope in this life only, we are of all people most to be pitied. But, in fact, Christ has been raised from the dead, the firstfruits of those who have fallen asleep. For as by a man came death, by a man has also come the resurrection of the dead. For as in Adam all die, so also in Christ shall all be made alive. But each in his own order, Christ the firstfruits, then at his coming those who belong to Christ. Then comes the end, when he delivers the kingdom to God the Father, after destroying every rule and every authority and power. For he must reign until he has put all his enemies under his feet. The last enemy to be destroyed is death. For God has put all things in subjection under his feet. But when it says all things are put in subjection, it is plain that he is accepted who put all things in subjection under him. When all things are subjected to him, then the Son himself will also be subjected to him who put all things in subjection under him, that God may be all in all. That subjection part is a little much to hear at 6:58 on a Wednesday night, but nonetheless, I hope you realize the importance of Christ's resurrection. If Jesus is not risen, then we have no hope of rising either. So thanks be to God that Jesus is risen, and that we have lots of evidence to point us to that reality. Page 36, I will leave as an exercise for you. Make a plan. Oh, I'm actually really, all right, I don't do things last minute, but I have no homework for you tonight. My temptation is to make you do page 36. But I'm gonna hold off on that because I don't know how I would grade it. But I do want you to think about it at least. Consider your friends or family who doubt the reality of Jesus' death and resurrection. Write a plan for how you could share with them some of the information you learned in this lesson. Remember that a gentle response works better than an attack of other people's other people's unbelief. Okay, so that concludes that. Before we depart, I want to hand out these handouts. This is a two-sided sheet. On one side, we have an invitation to our annual ski trip to the Andes Tower Hills. It's only $20 because we're going as a group rate and the church is covering half of it. That includes your lift ticket and your ski rental. So really good deal. It's on the Sunday of President's Day weekend, February 18th. All the details are there. We need an RSVP by February 14th, by Valentine's Day. Speaking of Valentine's Day, on the back there is a note that we have a special Valentine's dinner fundraiser on February 14th from 5:30 to 7. Class is canceled that day. Hooray! You guys get to help out with the fundraiser instead of being in class. It's a big deal, and all youth in grades 5 through 12 are expected to attend. You're going to be serving tables and helping in the kitchen during the fundraiser. Try to dress in something nice. And yes, apologetics class is canceled for the night. That night happens to be the RSVP deadline for the ski trip, so it all connects back to February 14th, which is Valentine's Day and also Ash Wednesday.
Oh yeah. Said, oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Finally, I have some homework to hand back to you. I've been hard at work grading papers, but I know I have a long way to go, so I apologize for that. Once you've received the homework, you may exit the room and await closing prayer.
Wait a minute. Homework.
Your graded homework.
Oh.
Graded homework. No assignment. Good night, everyone.